It's a hard blow because when you feel you did nothing wrong, this incident did not take more than 5 minutes. You know, it turned my life upside down. I don't know if he committed a 211. You know, there's a Carl's Jr. that he could have just robbed. Is he drunk? Is he on drugs? Does he have warrants? Why is he running? If he starts the car and he comes towards me, I mean, that's a deadly weapon. So self-preservation, you know, that's when I pulled out my gun. And I was protecting my family. I was protecting the public. If he were to continue going and he kills and runs over a student, you know, that's going to come back to me as to why did you let him go? Your life can change in the matter of 30 seconds. I mean, basically, that's what happened to me.
First, I'd like to thank you guys all for being here. This is fortunately a rare opportunity that we get to actually kind of go behind the scenes and see how CSLEA's Legal Defense Fund and legal representation operates, because it's not often that we have one of our members that's criminally prosecuted and fired from their job, which is a good thing. But I think it'll be very beneficial for our members and potential members to see kind of how important this benefit is as part of your membership, especially when you're only, $2 of your membership dues are going to fund the CSLEA legal defense system. So I'd like to start with introductions. First, to my left is Jaime Sal Martinez. You go by Sal, correct? Okay, Sal is a ABC, alcoholic beverage control agent, for 10 years now. Prior to that, he was Yuba County Sheriff's Office deputy for 16 years. To Sal's left is Greg Thoming, who is a senior associate for Mastagny Holstedt, one of the law firms on the CSLEA Legal Defense Fund statewide panel. Greg became the lead attorney after the preliminary hearing concerning Sal's criminal case and represented Sal during the criminal jury trial. And directly across from me is Kevin Highbaugh. Kevin is also an ABC agent. He's president of the CSLEA affiliate, the California Alcoholic Beverage Control Agents Association, CABCA. And Kevin also serves as a trustee on the CSLEA Legal Defense Fund, which kind of provides some additional unique perspective on the oversight of this case. So I think at the outset what I'd like to do, and unfortunately, Sal, you've probably had to tell this story more times than you would have wished to tell it. But I would like you to kind of just run through the facts of the circumstances which occurred on February 1st, 2016. As a preface, I think most often peace officers feel that there's probably not going to be a need for legal defense unless they're involved in an officer-involved shooting, or they have to actually go hand-to-hand with somebody and take them into custody. But I think the circumstances, the facts of your case demonstrate that the need for legal defense can arise in circumstances other than kind of the traditional means. So can you kind of give us a description of what happened on February 1st, 2016?
Sure. Basically, it was all an accident, traffic collision. It wasn't your normal fender bender, but it was a traffic collision with, serious injuries. Both my wife and I were transporting. But it was a traffic collision, and you would think nothing more of it. We were T-boned, and I perceived that the other vehicle.
So let me just stop you there, just so we can kind of get some perspective. So this is a day off. You're not working your normal
Yes.
ABC assignment.
Yes,
You,
correct.
you're out shopping with your wife.
Yes.
And you guys are on your way home. It's getting later in the afternoon.
Right.
And you're traveling down a roadway with approximately how many lanes?
Well, 4 lanes going each way, or 2 lanes going each way.
Okay. And can you describe kind of how the accident occurred?
Sure. It's a T intersection. So that you got 2 lanes going north, 2 lanes going south, with turn lanes as well. Approaching the intersection, minding my own business. Like you said, I was just going home after shopping. My wife mentioned something about she saw a car do a California stop. She looked. She said, "Watch out!" twice. Both times I looked to the right, thinking that that's where the car was coming. That's the only, part of the intersection. But they're not realizing that there's a parking lot on the left, and that's where the vehicle was coming from, and T-boned us on the driver's side. I was hitting in the driver's side door, rear passenger door, and the quarter panel of the vehicle.
So the vehicle that struck you actually crossed over 2 lanes of
Correct.
opposite traffic and then struck you in the lane
Correct.
of traffic.
Correct. I was in the number 1 lane of my lane of traffic.
Okay.
And so spun us around, ended up in the lawn and sidewalk of the neighboring business on the corner there.
And then you're facing back into the area
opposite.
where the collision actually occurred.
Correct. So I'm looking basically back at the intersection where that vehicle should have been, as it struck my vehicle. Vehicle stopped spinning. I look up, the vehicle's gone. I look around, I can't see the vehicle.
And no one's approaching you that appeared to be involved in the accident to
No.
check on you to see
Nobody.
if you and your wife were okay.
Correct. Nobody was. Obviously,
Okay.
we were just left there. So at that point, I looked to my wife and I said, "Hey, the guy took off."
Now your wife, just so I can stop you for a second, had prior injuries.
Yes, correct. She had a fusion on an L4, L5 in her back. So she had a recent back surgery.
Okay, and do you remember what she kind of exclaimed as a result of the impact of the accident?
First thing she said is, "My back. I can't move."
Okay.
At that point, I felt that it was a felony hit and run in the sense that the vehicle took off, and with my wife's injuries, I don't know why this car's fleeing now. Whether he was drunk, just committed a robbery, have a warrant. I don't know why he's running. So I'm trying to get now. I'm thinking that I get into on-duty mode in the sense that I'm thinking as a police officer, why is this guy running? And I want to get a better description of this vehicle that I barely saw, and also to get a better direction of travel.
Okay.
So I jump out of my seat, and I can't get out of my driver's side door because it's crushed. And so I get out of the back rear passenger door, and I have to run around the vehicle. I trip over the grill of a vehicle that's sitting on the ground. I don't fall. I'm able to gain my composure, but I start to run down the street. And I'm running down the street. I can't see the vehicle, going down the street. I don't see anything. I look around. I can't see if the vehicle pulled into a parking lot, or they're getting on foot. Are they just trying to flee on foot or whatever? And I figure at that point that he's gone, which is when I turn around and I'm facing again now the direction of the where the collision was, and I see this vehicle in front of me with a missing grille and damage to the bumper, no front plate.
You pretty much knew that was the vehicle that had struck you.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, correct. So at that point, I'm looking. I start yelling at the driver to get out of the vehicle. Never have eye-to-eye contact with the driver. He never looks up. He's never hearing to my commands when I tell him, get out of the car, get out of the car. I then revert to police, get out of the car, police, get out of the car. He doesn't. When I realize that I'm in a precarious situation, now I'm standing in front of a vehicle that can potentially, he's trying to start it and could be coming at me, and for self-preservation reasons, I need to do something. I'm not going to stand in front of a vehicle without any protection.
Because you also have concerns for the safety of the public at large based on the fact that you had no idea why he had apparently left the scene of the collision.
Right, correct. So,
or why he had caused the collision.
right, correct.
So, at that point, for not only my safety or, the public safety, it's, for everybody's safety, which is when I unholstered my gun and I pointed to his direction to get his attention, to get, to keep him from trying to, start his vehicle. I remember looking at, and I can see his hand, and I can see the hand twisting, trying to start the vehicle. I continued to yell at him, police get out of the car, police get out of the car. Again, no eye contact, which is at the point where I realized I need to get out of this situation or the position where I'm at. It's not a good position to be in if he starts the vehicle. So I start to come around, and which is when I come around to the driver's side of the vehicle, and I open the door, and I tell him, I can still continue giving him orders to, police get out of the car.
Now, at some point, there was some realization that the driver of the suspect vehicle did not speak English.
Correct.
Okay, so at what point in the contact did that occur?
It was after I opened the driver's side door, and I told him, I continued to speak to him in English, and I said, police get out of the car several times. At which point he said, I don't speak English, and that's when I told him, well, I speak Spanish. And at that point, was when he tells me, I'm not getting out until the police get here. And I told him, well, I am a police officer. You get out of the car. And he still proceeds to not adhere to my commands. And so at that point, I think in my mind, trying to assess the threat in the sense that I want to get him out of the vehicle or get the vehicle disabled to where he's not able to flee. And I think of just making a further movement to towards him, which I'm able to get him to react and lean back, which gives me the window for me to get in and actually retrieve the keys out of the ignition.
Not only verbally didn't you identify yourself, didn't you identify yourself in another means as well?
Yes, I did. When he did say that I'm not getting here until the police get here, it's when I was able to reach into my wallet and retrieve my flat badge, and then I showed it to him. And when I did that initially the first time, I flipped the felt over to show him the badge, and I dropped it. And so again, trying to roll with the punches, have to take a step back, and also still continue to keep my safety in mind and pick up the badge. And I re-showed it to him, and then at that point put it away.
So not only you verbally identified yourself when he says, I'm not going to get out until the police get here, you showed him your badge as well.
Right, correct.
And he's still
not adhering to my commands. That's correct.
So you were able to get the keys from the ignition?
Yes.
And then what did you do after that?
As soon as I grabbed the keys out of the ignition, I took a step back, put the keys in my pocket, and right about then, that's pretty much at the same time as I was backing up, law enforcement or marked units showed up and took over the scene.
After that, did you have any contact with any passerbyers or anything?
Yes.
Prior to that?
Yes. When I grabbed the keys and I was backing up, when I was backing up is when there was a vehicle that was coming, made a turn towards my direction, which is when he pulled up and he rolled down his window, and I asked him, hey, I'm an off-duty police officer, I've just been in an accident, can you call 911?
And do you believe, did he call, or do you know?
Yes,
he did call?
He did call, yes.
I think you actually got placed on the phone with dispatch at
Yes,
that
correct.
time.
He contacted dispatch, and then he provided me with the phone and said, hey, they want to talk to you.
Okay.
And that individual actually became an important witness at
Yes,
the trial.
Yes, he did, because he was able to dispel statements that the suspect was saying that I did, that he was saying that I did, but in actuality I did not.
Right. And also, just so the timeline is clear, after you were able to retrieve the keys, what did you do with your firearm?
I holstered it.
Okay. So law enforcement arrives on scene. They take your statement. You were ultimately transported by ambulance along
Yes.
with your wife, correct?
Correct.
And at the time that law enforcement responded to the scene of the incident, were you ever cited for any allegations of criminal conduct on your part during the course of the
No,
incident?
none whatsoever. No.
Okay.
I was not found at fault of the accident as well.
Okay.
The other driver was actually cited for a vehicle code violation.
So at some point you learned that criminal charges have been filed against you in Sutter County?
Yes, correct.
Can you describe how you learned that?
Just minding my own business one day, and come May 5th, I went to the mail and I saw a letter from Sutter County District Attorney's Office, and it was just a letter saying that they were filing criminal charges against me for 417, which is unlawfully brandishing a weapon, and 245 assault with a deadly weapon.
Wow. How did you, how did you react when you saw that letter?
I was taken aback. You know, it's one of the things that, you know, I've told people is I was interviewed on scene regarding the accident. I was never interviewed regarding any criminal wrongdoing, not only by the police department nor the DA's office. And I just get this letter saying that they're filing these charges, and I'm thinking, well, you haven't done half of your investigation yet. You know, and I mean, I recall I showed my wife, I told my wife, and then next thing I called you.
Right. So this is a good lead in, and I think I neglected to do my own introduction when I was doing the introductions. So my name's Kasey Clark. I'm Chief Counsel for California Statewide Law Enforcement Association. I also serve as legal administrator for the Legal Defense Fund. And so in that capacity, my responsibility is to make arrangements for legal counsel in matters which qualify for coverage under the CSLEA Legal Defense Fund plan. And so when I received information from Sal relative to this criminal filing and looked at the circumstances of the filing, where, you know, my belief is where a peace officer is required to take enforcement action in even an off-duty capacity, that is considered course and scope of that officer's employment. So I made arrangements to secure the services of a LDF panel attorney firm, Ms. Stagney Holstead. And the case was initially assigned, to Judith Odbert, and then Greg took over as lead attorney, I believe, subsequent to the preliminary hearing of the case. And I also, in that capacity, made arrangements to help facilitate the services of a police practices expert, Jeff Martin, who's a retired San Jose police captain. And I also made arrangements to associate a local criminal attorney, Roberto Marquez, who became part of the trial team in the criminal case. So that's kind of what was going on the LDF side of things, on the administrative side of things, because, you know, unfortunately, ABC kind of got put in the place where they have now one of their sworn officers being charged with felonies. They were under an obligation to conduct an administrative investigation into the allegations as well. And so I represented Sal on the administrative side during 2 internal affairs interviews.
But if I could just interject,
sure.
I just want to just say that, I mean, I was just so impressed with just the quickness of how you interjected into everything. I mean, it's like there was no lag time from when I called you. I mean, you were there right away. And I don't know if I can say this, but I mean, it's like as far as you as an attorney for the union, I felt like you were just there for me. You know, it was.
Well, thank you, Sal. I mean, that's what we strive to do, and that's kind of the importance of having legal defense coverage and being a member of CSLEAs to be able to have that resource available to you under these, you know, unfortunate circumstances.
I think it's really important to get out to the people that we offer something very unique, and in your situation, it worked really well. In some of the other organizations I've been with, you had to go through a chief job steward or something like that, CSLEA, we pride ourselves in being able to have our members contact an attorney directly and save all that. And I think it was really beneficial in your case. We have at least 3 attorneys up here and the same in Southern California. And we really pride ourselves that they're available 24/7.
Right.
And so I'm glad to hear you say that you were able to get through with one, because that's what we've set this plan up to be, and it worked.
Right. It did. It worked perfectly. And I was just, access to you. I mean, it's not like I had to go through a phone tree or anything, or talk to somebody else, or let me talk to him and I'll have him call you. It's like, I mean, I was able to just directly come to you and talk to you right off the bat.
And
That was awesome.
as a trustee, there's 4 of us trustees on the Legal Defense Fund and Casey, and we meet quarterly and we go over all our rules, if you will, and how the program works. And to see that it step in and work like it's supposed to, it is a good thing. It's extremely comforting that that's what we planned for and that's what happened
Right.
in an extreme case like this.
Right.
Yeah, and I want to come back to kind of
Sure.
your role in terms of overseeing, what was going on with the criminal trial and your services as LDF trustee. So, on the administrative side, which I was getting to it, but I appreciate the kind words for how the system works out. Realistically, and it's not uncommon under these circumstances where you have a criminal case pending, that the administrative case kind of has to kind of take a back seat because obviously one's liberty is more important than their job in terms of the ranking of priorities, and oftentimes you need a criminal case to play out before you can see what your latitude is like on the administrative side. So basically, once ABC did its administrative investigation, did your interviews, the criminal case and charges were still pending, and they moved forward with dismissal, which is not something that is a surprise. I mean, that was not something that you or I were surprised
Right.
of. It's unfortunate, but it was not a surprise. And so we kind of just placed the criminal case on the back burner, the administrative case on the back burner while the criminal case was pending. And so I'd like to move over to kind of the criminal case and bring Greg in on this. And you kind of picked this up. I was originally assigned to one of the senior associates that you work with over there, Judy Odbert, who's a great attorney. And it's unfortunate because I think you and I were talking before we went on that, how large the criminal section of your firm has grown, which evidences kind of the dynamics of what's going on in society right now with how many officers are getting charged with criminal offenses. So can you kind of just take us into, how you got involved in the case and then kind of where you picked it up and where you went with it?
Sure, Casey. So Judy Odbert had the case, and she was the attorney at the preliminary hearing. And just because all of the membership, unless they're testifying at a preliminary hearing, may not be, familiar with the process on the other end, when you're sitting there as a defendant, we try to explain to everyone, a preliminary hearing is not a trial. It is merely the district attorney's opportunity to put up and show that there is sufficient evidence, perhaps to hold someone to answer on a felony, or if there's not that evidence there, for the court to discharge the matter and dismiss it, or if the conduct alleged and or the defendant's record are de minimis, to reduce it, in fact, to a misdemeanor. And coming in after the preliminary hearing, every lawyer likes to do their own preliminary hearing because you kind of set the tone for the case. And Judy did a great job, but I came in afterwards, and there were some peculiarities that had occurred with the court at this particular preliminary hearing, despite all the local law enforcement, who, again, as Sal had mentioned, were not investigating a crime in terms of an assault with a deadly weapon. They were investigating a traffic collision. And so what happened is the local law enforcement that testified at the preliminary hearing, in fact, some of them knew Sal. They had seen him at their own police department, perhaps booking evidence and things of that nature. His wife, who was another victim of the traffic collision, explained to them that her husband was law enforcement. Other officers just testified they, of their own personal knowledge, knew he was law enforcement. And yet we had a very interesting comment from the court that there was nothing showing in the record that he was law enforcement, which, just as I'm reviewing this transcript later, was something that didn't jibe with the state of the evidence. The other thing that was interesting is there was discussion about reduction to a misdemeanor. And here we have a guy, multiple years in law enforcement, no criminal record. Certainly he would be someone that would qualify for what we call a penal code section 17B motion to reduce to a misdemeanor. But again, the court made a statement that would Sal plead to it if it were reduced to a misdemeanor at that time.
Well, and the misdemeanor that the court wanted him to plead to at that time was one that carried a firearms restriction that would not have allowed him to return to his former employment with ABC, correct?
Absolutely. It would have been merely a reduction to the Penal Code 245A2, felony assault with a firearm can be reduced to a misdemeanor. That's what would have happened. Sal would have had the firearms restriction imposed 10 years, and he would have lost his job.
Correct.
So,
and it's just some of these things, and I apologize for cutting you off, but obviously my role as the legal administrator, I'm in fairly frequent contact with both Judy before your entrance and then you during the time that you took over with the case. So we were having conversations as these things were developing, but the court basically said, I'm willing to reduce, but your client has to agree to accept the plea right now. He has to make a decision as I sit here on the bench as to whether he's willing to accept a plea that includes a 10-year firearms restriction, correct?
That's how we took the court statements. And the case law is very clear that at a preliminary hearing, the judge sits at what we call as a magistrate. And the magistrate can do one of three things: hold to answer, another bind over for trial on a felony, discharge the defendant and say there's not sufficient evidence here at all for these charges, or reduce the charge to a misdemeanor. But the way it was phrased and the way it came out indicated that there could be a reduction, but it would have to be in exchange for a plea. And this is an issue I've actually litigated in several other counties. And in one instance, I've had the head of law and motion for a rather large county call me, having read through my motion, and say, we're going to reduce it and rearraign your client on a misdemeanor. But we didn't get that treatment in this particular case.
Where it was non-conditional, basically.
Yeah. And so that case ended up being litigated and ended up in a dismissal. But the point being that we felt we weren't really given a choice here. And so the two things at the preliminary hearing that just raised issues in my mind were not seeing that Sal was a peace officer acting in his capacity as law enforcement, and then additionally, in our mind, not really litigating fully or letting us put forth the 17B reduction to a misdemeanor. So what I did, and it's a very common.
So before you go on, how did the preliminary hearing conclude? Because I thought that was pretty shocking when I read the transcript.
Well, there was a comment by the court that said this may be a bit much, but that essentially the court was going to hold him on the felony charge.
Right. So they basically said even though the evidence at least that had been presented at the preliminary hearing might not meet the evidentiary standard for a felony charge, he was still going to hold Sal over regardless.
That's what the court indicated.
Okay. So where did you go from there?
So I'm not at the preliminary hearing. I'm reading this transcript. And so the next thing that we commonly do as criminal defense lawyers is we file something called a Penal Code 995 motion. And what this motion is, it's a motion to set aside the felony information. So a criminal case starts with a complaint. You then go to the preliminary hearing, and if there's a holding order on the felony, the next document filed by the district attorney is a felony information. So given what we consider to be the errors at the preliminary hearing, we asked that the felony information be set aside. And again, having litigated some of these issues and having some positive responses from district attorneys' offices and other jurisdictions, I was optimistic that we had some real meat here. This was in no way a frivolous motion. And so I went up to Sutter County and was well prepared and had at this point, talked to Sal a lot, gotten to know him, got to know that, he's a good person and a good agent. And we went up there and argued it. And I will say this, the judge that listened to that let me put forth my arguments on the record, let me incorporate the pleadings, which were very detailed, but at the end, the motion was essentially summarily denied, which was a surprise, and of course that preserved an issue for appeal had we ever had to go there. So the next thing that comes up, of course, is we're now going to trial. And there were discussions with the district attorney's office, but again, we came back on this issue about the 10-year gun prohibition and wanting to preserve Sal's job, and also just feeling that there wasn't evidence there supporting the charges as they had been pled. So preparing for the trial encompassed a lot, and there were a lot of people that really contributed to this. First of all, we had a client and his wife, Maria, who was a critical witness, who just came across to the jury as nice folks. And I think that was perceived. And aside from all the legal moves on both sides, at the core of the trial, I really think that the testimony of Sal and the testimony of Maria as just good, honest, hardworking people was perceived by these wonderful jurors that we had up in Sutter County who respect law enforcement, and I think that was critical. But along the way, we picked up some more players, and bringing in Roberto Marquez, who is a local trial lawyer who litigates and tries cases regularly in serious felony cases and homicides and things of that nature in the counties north of Sacramento. Roberto was just great. He's a great lawyer. He's a great person. He has a lot of charisma in the courtroom. He and I have very different styles, but we received some comments from the jurors later that they thought we were a great team together. And he just brought a lot of respect. I could tell that the judges and the district attorneys, knowing him, having had to deal with him in court every day of the week, it brought a lot of respect to the table that helped us.
And just to follow up on that, I know as an attorney also practicing primarily out of Sacramento County, but having litigated in other counties throughout Northern California generally, is there were times where I felt personally, and I also thought some of it was going on in this case, was that there was kind of this hometowning kind of approach where, you know, and I'm not to say we know for certain that that was occurring, but the sense I get based on a judge that's saying, well, I don't think that there's any evidence that's been introduced at the preliminary hearing that Sal was acting as a peace officer at the time of the incident, and that there's probably not enough evidence to hold him over on the felony, but I'm going to do it anyway, that this hometowning might be in play. And so I think it was a good thing to bring Roberto in, because I thought perhaps having somebody that knew the players in Sutter County, that maybe people would come to their senses and go, okay, let's resolve this reasonably and move on. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. But as it turned out, he was a good asset to have during the course of the criminal trial.
Absolutely. And I was just going to say in that regard, I have 20 years of experience. I've litigated throughout the state, but there are certain counties where I've litigated extensively, and those judges, those district attorneys know me, and you're just treated in a different manner.
Right.
And that's just, how things are. So in addition to Roberto, who's just a great trial lawyer and, really become a good friend from all this experience, and is certainly someone I would recommend we look at if we have other cases in those counties north of Sacramento. We also had, as you mentioned, Jeff Martin. And due to a series of rulings in the trial court, we actually never put Jeff on the stand as an expert witness. But here, a guy with 26 years with the San Jose Police Department, so knowledgeable about tactics, about how a law enforcement officer or peace officer should act under a variety of situations. He was extraordinarily helpful with me and with Roberto in helping us with our direct and cross-examinations. Now, this case was also a little abnormal in that we, the defense, called the majority of the police officers to testify. Usually the prosecution calls the police officers. And other than one young officer that they called to just put forth some preliminary facts, we called law enforcement, and the law enforcement were wonderful witnesses for us. They testified truthfully, and they testified that they were not conducting a felony assault with a firearm investigation or a brandishing of a firearm investigation. They were conducting a traffic collision investigation. And one example of that is we had a officer who had since moved over to Red Bluff and become a sergeant over there. And we talked a bit about video canvassing. And if that had occurred, where you check local businesses to see if they have video of a certain intersection where a collision or crime or whatever occurred. And he said, well, I didn't do that here. And I said, why didn't you do that here? Because this was merely a traffic collision.
Right.
And I said, had you been investigating a felony assault with a firearm case, or had you been investigating a brandishing case, would you have done that? Certainly. And so again, we got these truthful answers from the local police department who did their job well, but we get these charges that didn't flow from their investigation at all.
Right. So we've kind of branched into the actual criminal case, sure, the jury trial that occurred, and this was back in August, correct? So can you talk a little bit more about, kind of last-ditch attempts to resolve this case and kind of where the DA's office was on how whether this case could be resolved short of going to a full jury trial?
We had further discussions, and again, we tried to artfully craft a way that the matter could be resolved without the gun prohibition. And that just didn't happen. And, our judge tried to become actively involved in that and thought that was, the right thing to do here. But again, we just didn't have a receptive audience on the other side of that discussion.
Yeah, but it sounds from our communications, and I don't mind throwing people under the bus where they deserve to be thrown under the bus. And the deputy DAs that were involved in this, this can't be a case that as a prosecutor that you're looking to try when you're not dealing with a criminal. You're dealing with somebody that's sworn to uphold the law. My understanding is that even the DAs that were assigned to try the case felt that it should be resolved short of going through a felony trial, but the buck stopped at the level of the DA.
The trial deputies definitely tried to have constructive discussions with me, and we tried to resolve the matter, and they ended up having to do their jobs.
Okay. And so let's get a little bit more into the developments that occurred during the jury trial.
Well, jury selection was very interesting, and Roberto did the voir dire, but he actually asked me, and I actually had Saul participate quite a bit in actually selecting the jurors. And we had a rather diverse jury, about half men, half women. We had persons of color on the jury, and we really just, through extensive voir dire, tried to get people who said they could be fair to a law enforcement officer. And some people were just flat out, I have to talk outside the presence of everyone else, and they talked about what they perceived as some bad interactions with law enforcement, but at least they were honest about it. Other people, just said there's no way I can serve on this jury, or, they had their reasons. But I think overall, I was very impressed with the jury pool and with how candid they were, because sometimes you feel like, hey, people may be out to get somebody who's either this or that, and they're not necessarily being completely truthful in their disclosures. But I felt our panel really was. And you sometimes hear some horrible things, not from law enforcement, but just from that people have experienced at maybe the hands of a spouse or something like that, outside all that. So it's a very humanizing process, I would say, picking a jury. And I think we ultimately ended up with a jury that was very fair and could listen to both sides. Another thing that was kind of interesting in this trial is both the driver and his mother in the other car and my clients were both Latino. So there really wasn't a racial component in that situation. And so the jury selection, I think, was very interesting. There were also multiple motions, some of which we brought more than once. And one of those, of course, had to do with Sal's status as a peace officer. And under Penal Code Section 830.2 sub H, ABC agents are sworn peace officers. And we argued that throughout. We were consistent about that throughout. The district attorney seized on a case that had to do with the Santa Barbara Harbor Patrol. And they also seized on a Business and Professions Code section. And they tried to argue that ABC agents are not 24/7 sworn law enforcement. And we adamantly argued otherwise.
And that, just as a point of emphasis, I mean, that 24/7 means that in addition to the responsibilities that they have in terms of, when they're truly on duty, what their principal law enforcement functions are, the period of time where they may not be working, but they're somewhere where they see a threat to public safety, the threat for potential serious bodily harm or injury to themselves or the public. And as a peace officer, that imposes a duty on them to act. It's not even discretionary under state law and the AG opinions interpreting state law.
Absolutely, and as a society, isn't that what we want? We want our sworn law enforcement to be out there, and if they see someone being beaten up, or if they see someone fleeing a crime scene, we want them to intervene and stop those subjects.
Absolutely, absolutely. So you were getting to what happened during the motion that was made by the prosecution to make a finding that Sal was not acting in the capacity as a peace officer at the time of the incident.
So we filed, my able associates back at the office were working hard on the law and the briefing, and we actually argued that motion twice. We briefed it twice, and we lost, and again, that was just an issue that we obviously preserved for appeal. And we obviously, given the acquittal in this case on both the charges, we didn't have to go there, but it was a very serious issue. I was in touch with both of you. I was in touch with officials at ABC who were very concerned about where this was heading, and we had to move forward.
Under that penal code, I mean, it's 830.2, so you also have highway patrol officers as well as correctional officers that are covered under that same statute.
Yes.
So, in terms of your strategy in this case, I mean, the plan is, this was a complete surprise. I mean, we collectively could not believe the court was going to rule in the way that it did, would be fair to say, correct?
Yes.
And so the strategy that we had lined up with Jeff Martin was that he was going to come in as a police practices expert and explain why Sal's actions were appropriate, given that he was called upon to act as a peace officer during his off-duty capacity. And now the court has said, well, he wasn't acting as a peace officer. So how does that then impact Jeff Martin in terms of his ability to participate in the trial?
Well, it created an issue because the argument was that we had no foundation to put Jeff up to offer his opinions. However, Jeff was just so invaluable. We met during the breaks, we met each day afterwards, we discussed through issues that had arisen, and just having someone that's been on the job 26 years, that is a police procedures expert, and who has testified about halftime for the defense and halftime for the prosecution. So this is a guy that really knows his stuff, and he's going to offer his testimony to those cases he thinks he can help. And from day one with this case, Jeff was just, I think like many of us were, why are we here?
Yeah, I mean, I remember my initial conversations with Jeff about, him thinking that this was such an injustice that, he first said, if Sal can't afford to hire me, I'll do this on my own dime because this is so wrong. I think he even ultimately agreed to reduce his usual and customary rates to something that was within the parameters of what the plan can pay in order to participate. But I guess, from our discussion when this happened, we're considering, do we go on an immediate appeal to seek a reversal in the middle of the trial, or do we let this play out, which is ultimately the collective decision we reached. But I mean, this took away an essential part of the defense in Sal's case, which I'm sure was most
disconcerting to everyone.
And to Sal probably more than anyone.
Yeah.
And so where did you have to go? I mean, how did you change tracks in terms of where the defense went?
Essentially, in this type of situation, a citizen has a right to stop a crime in progress or to stop a fleeing suspect under citizen's arrest theory. And so we still did get a citizen's arrest jury instruction. However, we even fought on that to the extent that in the citizen's arrest jury instruction, the district attorney wanted to include language that Sal was not in the performance of his duties at that time, which we thought was unduly prejudicial, and anyone else that was a citizen wouldn't get that added part to that instruction. Again, we litigated that issue, we lost that issue, and we preserved that for appeal. But we did get a citizen's arrest instruction, and then during the course of the cross-examination by the district attorney asked certain questions, and Sal's truthful testimony opened up that there was also a self-defense. So we also got that instruction. But this was, as a lawyer who, takes pride in his knowledge of the law and his ability to litigate the law, we kept hitting roadblocks on the legal side of things. But then, again, I come back to Sal, to Maria, and to this Good Samaritan passerby who Sal stopped and who made the 911 call. And I think it was their truthful testimony and also finding contradictions and discrepancies in some of the prosecution witnesses' testimony that got us to our not guilty verdicts.
And so let's go, before we get to the delivery of the verdict, I want to turn to Kevin now and kind of talk about, your role in all this, because you're a co-worker of Sal's, you're the affiliate president for the ABC Agent Classification, you're also trustee on the Legal Defense Fund. So kind of give us some perspective on kind of how you're monitoring all this. I know that you attended some of the criminal proceedings as well, and also kind of touch on your role as a trustee in terms of oversight of the case.
Absolutely. Well, I would say after the initial shock wore off that Sal was being charged criminally and had lost his job. I don't know if Sal remembers, but Sal was actually one of my FTOs when I transferred over to ABC years ago. So we had that bond. We had worked together before. We were friends, and so it was a unique situation for me. Well, I know we have about 200 members just in CABCA, but I had a different rapport with Sal that I might with somebody from Southern or something. So after the initial shock wore off, I kind of went through my mind saying, look, I've been a trustee now for a few years on this legal defense fund. This is what it's for. Let's put the ball in motion. And I made contact with Sal. And I think my biggest role was just to make sure that the lines of communication were open, and then just to stay positive with him, just to make sure that he stayed positive, that he kept his head up, that he knew that there was people at ABC that had his back.
What was your impressions of, when you were able to participate in the trial and kind of what you were able to see?
it was great to see that the day that I went up there, it was the day that actually Sal was on the stand, and Maria, and I believe your daughter as well was on the stand too. And it was great to walk in there and see a bunch of ABC staff, his coworkers, friends, and stuff there. Mind you, they were there on their own time. We were all there on our own time to support Sal in that way. And after I saw Sal and his wife on the stand, I walked out with another one of our old coworkers that we both worked with, and we said, "It's done. This is over." We were that positive that this was going in a good direction.
And I remember, after the fact, I ordered transcripts because I didn't know what was going to happen on the administrative side of things, just once we got a favorable verdict. But there was, I don't know, it was a couple pages of Sal's testimony that I thought just, completely blew me away about something about, it reminded me of the movie with Jack Nicholson about, us being on the wall or whatever.
You can't tell me that.
Yeah, it's just like,
you can't handle the truth.
Well, yeah, but I mean, because Sal was talking about, as peace officers, we're the ones that are paid to run towards trouble in order to protect the public. And I just thought that was, some extremely moving testimony. And I wasn't even there personally to witness it. I just got that off the page.
It was, and from the first time I talked with Sal about this until today, Sal has never, and this was a traumatic incident on your day off when you're least expecting anything to happen. And Sal has never, his story has been the same since the car accident until today.
Right.
And it showed on the stand. It showed. And another thing too is that he did exactly what he was trained to do.
Right.
I could see everything, and this goes all the way back to going into the academy. He acted exactly how he was supposed to, how he'd been trained.
Right.
And to find out that we weren't, all these issues where we weren't peace officers off duty, and then the prelim stuff and all that stuff, it was just shocking because he did if he did something different, I would have been shocked. He did exactly what he was supposed to do. His wife, we didn't even talk about it. His wife did what, she has done some dispatching through the 911 system up in, I believe, Yuba County. And I don't think we talked about that, but she actually was able to not get her phone because her phone went on the floor and she couldn't even reach it, but she was able to find Sal's phone in there and do what she was supposed to do. And even though she was in a state of shock as well.
Right.
And so it was good to see that on the stand. It came across exactly what happened from the day I initially talked to him.
Right.
And it was a clear picture.
Well, it was good for you, again, segueing to the trustee kind of mode, to be able to see one of our panel attorneys in action, in a serious criminal case.
I like we said, we've set up all these procedures through the Legal Defense Fund. I believe in the system that we have. But it hadn't been tested to this extent from the time I've been on it, let's say. I'm sure it has in the past, but since I've been on it a couple of years, this was the big case, if you will, while I've been sitting as a trustee. And it was good to see, to meet with the other trustees. And there was a point where we got to, there's a cap that they put, a monetary cap on this, and it was good as a trustee. And to be able to go back and say, look, this guy is a good guy, and this is a bogus case. Right. We need to extend that cap, if we will. And then the trustees all voted, and we were able to do that.
Let's turn to the verdict now that you guys have put on the evidence. The jury has been given their instructions. How long did the deliberations go on?
So that happened. I think it went to the jury an afternoon, and so they deliberated the rest of that business day and then adjourned for the evening. And they did actually come out, as I recall, and ask if they could deliberate a little bit more. So it went a little later than would typical for a court day. And then they came back the next morning to deliberate it again for 4 or 5 hours.
Well, 2 initially, I think.
2 initially, okay. Came back.
They had that question.
Right.
And then they came back after that.
They came back after that. So it was.
So you work out of the Sacramento office. Were you here ready to respond there, or were you kind of staying local at that point relative to the jury deliberation?
So what I was driving back and forth every day, but what the court had said is it wanted me close. So again, our local counsel has an office in Marysville, just across the river. So I just went, and he was kind enough to let me use his conference room, and then we were ready to go when we got the call.
Okay, and so you guys all report to the courtroom, and we've seen it on television, at least how the process works. But.
No, it was really, so, they came back and they said not guilty as to the felony charge of the Penal Code 245A2, felony assault with a firearm. And we felt very confident that that was going to happen. We also thought that the evidence presented was such that they should come back not guilty on the 417, the misdemeanor brandishing charge. But one never knows, and sometimes one sees juries split the difference or something like that. So I just remember, when that second not guilty came, and then I had this arm around me, and it was my good friend Sal, and it was an amazing, moment. And Roberto, my co-counsel, looked over and smiled, and it was a very hard-fought case, and we just kept fighting issue after issue. And with that final, declaration by the jury, they did the right thing, ultimately.
So Sal, give us kind of your perspective. I mean, when you're hearing the verdict read.
Well, just through the whole thing, it's just I just felt that we got the rug pulled out of us or from under us each time we'd show up to court. With the different rulings that they had, and it's like, I come to the start of the trial. I really had no faith in the system. I felt this was all. And you hear that a lot. People saying it's like, I don't trust the system. I don't trust the system. And it's like, and I got there, and it's like I felt like, wow, I'm not trusting the system right now.
That was a lot of the conversations that we had during the course of this whole thing. Believe in the system. Believe in the system.
Right.
And we kept pushing that. Believe in the system.
Coming into this, it's like it was. I didn't know which way it was going to go. Even as the jury was walking in, it's like you're trying to get like a read off the jury as they're walking in, and it's like everybody was just not even looking at anybody, not even a smirk, not a smile, nothing, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, what's going to happen? It's like, but you know what? I honestly sat there and I thought to myself, you know what? Whatever it's going to be, it's going to be, and it was awesome.
I can tell you one of our conversations after, when I spoke with them afterwards, was go home, celebrate, enjoy the night, but we're not done. And I hope that's kind of where we're going next, because yes, the criminal case was done, but we still had a lot of work ahead of us on the admin side. So I said, no, go home and enjoy it with an awesome family. Go home and enjoy it with your family and friends, but we still got one more battle here.
Right.
And so, I guess, fortunately, your agency reached out to you fairly quickly after getting word of the verdict. Correct.
Yes, correct.
And what did we don't have to name names, but
we can. I
mean, say it was just very positive.
Right.
Yes,
it was very positive.
I had kept in contact with this individual
throughout
the whole process, and he actually reached out to me even after the firing. And so, when the verdict came out, I texted the verdict to him, and I said, hey, not guilty on all charges. And that evening, he called me to congratulate me, and he asked me, he's like, what are you going to do now? Do you want to come back to work? And I said, absolutely, I want to come back to work.
Tomorrow.
And, right. And which is at the time that he told me, it's like, well, have Kasey Clark, contact our attorney, our department attorney, and get working on it.
Right. And so I did. You contacted me. I did reach out, and I thought, okay, well, if the department has said they're receptive to taking him back, this is going to be easy. So
I didn't think it was going to be that easy.
Yeah. Interestingly, in this case, no, I didn't either, because I will say,
because I was expecting a fight.
To ABC's credit, as I said at the outset, I think their decision to dismiss you was principally driven by an overzealous district attorney in Suffolk County for the way they pursued this case to begin with. And absent that, you wouldn't have been off work for over a year.
And a half.
I'm waiting for resolution. I think the incident was like February, but I think you actually were taken off work in May or something.
Right.
So, and I, having litigated administrative cases, there's been a handful where I've had an employee that's gone through a criminal case, has been acquitted, but based on the differing standard of proof, not beyond a reasonable doubt in the criminal case, preponderance of evidence in the administrative, that the agency still says we want to retry this under a lesser evidentiary standard, and we're gonna fight the dismissal. And so I didn't know what ABC was going to do. I wasn't going to be shocked if they went through it, although I thought they might, see this case for what it was. But I reached out to the AG's office and said, hey, I've heard the agency's reached out to Sal. They're interested in bringing him back. And they said, okay, well, we'll check into it and we'll let you know. They got back to me and said, at this point, there's been no change in our position, in our client's position. ABC still intends on moving forward with the dismissal, but we're going to order the transcripts of the criminal case and then we'll review those and decide. And so I ordered the transcript as well. They did. Fairly quickly after reviewing them, they contacted me and said, hey, we do want to bring them back. Let's see what we can work out in terms of the parameters, and we were able to work through those and get you back to work. And,
Less than a week.
yeah.
It was less than a week after the transcripts?
Yeah,
because it seems like it took a long time. I'm sure it took longer for you to get those, or it felt longer to get those transcripts. But after, because what were their options, Kasey? Can you explain a little bit? They could either have brought him back, or what would?
Well, the options were just to pursue the dismissal before the state personnel board, and
so it would have went to the state personnel board,
right? And so, fortunately, we were able to reach a settlement agreement that got Sal back to work very quickly after they were able to review the transcripts. Right. And so, how long have you been back now?
Just a few days, over a month.
Yeah, and so, you were off for more than a year, or what was it? What was it like going back? Did it feel awkward at all? Was it? Did it feel good? Walking back through the door.
Well, it definitely felt good. It felt good that I was coming back, and it felt good being back. At first, I wasn't sure if I was going to feel awkward or what kind of feelings I was going to have. But through this whole process, my unit has basically had my back, including like you guys, and so it is. I came back and it was like I was never gone. The reception from everybody there was great.
Awesome.
It's been like nothing ever happened. I'm not going to forget the year and the time when that happened, but they I think the department did the right thing and doing what they did and bringing it back.
So, just kind of in closing, can you try to describe, because it's really important for, like I said, for our current members to understand, how huge of a benefit having legal defense and legal representation under these circumstances is.
Just with the simple fact that I wouldn't probably have a roof over my head right now, that alone. I think everybody. I can't stress it enough, and the benefits of being a member. And paying your dues and having that legal defense fund, right there, having you, like you said, you're telling me at lunch, not being able to talk to an attorney. I'd rather talk to you than to Kevin, and Kevin would refer me right to you, but you know the law a lot better than I do, or that he does, and maybe not criminally, but you right away turned me over to Ms. Dagny, which Greg works for. So just, having that representation, it's priceless for the minimal of dollars that it costs. You can't go wrong. It's definitely a benefit, and it's a benefit that's there for you. And I think everybody should take advantage of that. Because like we've talked, Kevin, you and I have said it. This was less than 5 minutes of an incident that took place. In 30 seconds, your life changes. Your life is upside down, and to be able to have that representation for you right there, it's just priceless.
Well, thanks so much, Sal. And thank you, Greg, for
You're welcome.
for you and your firm's services in this matter, and thank you for coming over to help participate in this discussion, because I think it is beneficial.
It's been a privilege.
Yeah.
Great.
All right. Have you back. Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you, Kevin. All right, thank you.